Henry's death had killed her power, but the walled-up door killed her legend. From that moment on, the source of her strength, her greatest secret, and her most terrible crime were to remain forever buried beneath lime and brick, silently awaiting the day when future generations might choose to lift this grim veil. Centuries turned Diane's story into a beautiful fairy tale. A walled-up room? The invention of a jealous queen or the product of servants' wild imaginations? Skeptical scholars would shrug. There was no direct proof, only a whisper, carried from the depths of time. But soon, science would get a chance to make this legend speak. To speak in a language that cannot lie, the language of chemical elements. Permission was granted to exhume the remains of Diane de Poitiers. The official goal was noble, to reconstruct her appearance. But forensic toxicologists and archaeologists had another, unspoken mission, to find physical proof for the myths. They began with the simplest and most reliable witness, her hair. Hair, like the rings of a tree, keeps a record of everything the body consumes. And when the results of the analysis appeared on the screen, a tomb-like silence fell over the laboratory. The level of gold in Diane's hair was off the charts. It was 500 times the normal level. 500. This was no accidental exposure. This was systematic, daily poisoning. But the most shocking part wasn't the gold. The spectrometer also detected lead and mercury alongside it. The entire deadly cocktail, whose recipe had been dismissed for centuries as allegory, was revealed to be the pure truth. Every sip of the gold chloride elixir of life, every application of lead-white makeup, every inhalation of mercury vapors, all of it had left its indelible mark. Her body, so beautiful on the outside, was a poisoned battlefield within, contaminated by her own hand. Science now had irrefutable proof. But what about the room itself? Modern technology has allowed us to peer behind the brickwork without touching it. Thermal imagers and ground-penetrating radar have confirmed it. The void exists. The room is real. Its dimensions, its location, everything matches the descriptions in ancient records. Yet here is the paradox. Despite these sensational findings and our technological capabilities, official permission to break down the wall was never granted.
Why? What drove a woman who had everything to risk not just her position, but her life and her very soul? This is a story about the price of love in a court where sincerity has no place. A story of how absolute power breeds absolute fear, and of the desperation that leads a person to wear a silk glove, hiding not the scent of perfume, but a deadly poison. Prepare to learn the story that Versailles itself tried to forget. To understand the desperation of Madame de Montespan, you must understand more than just the palace. You must understand the mechanism. Imagine a giant, perfectly polished clock. Every gear, every cog is in its place. The ticking of this clock is the rustle of silk gowns, the chime of crystal, the click of heels on parquet. And the pendulum, setting the rhythm for this entire intricate system, is one, His Majesty the King. Versailles was a gilded cage with bars made of etiquette. Here, everything was subject to ritual. Who had the right to hand the king his shirt? To light his candle? Who could walk through a door first? Careers, fortunes, the fates of entire families depended on it. In this universe, the favor of the Sun King was not merely a privilege. It was oxygen. Without it, you were suffocated. Slowly and elegantly. And into this cage, they admitted a rare, beautiful bird. Françoise Athénaïs de Rochechouart, the Marquise de Montespan. She was not one to twitter timidly in a corner. Her arrival at court was like a flash of light. She didn't just eclipse her predecessor, the meek Louise de la Vallière. She erased her. La Vallière was moonlight, quiet, devoted, sorrowful. Montespan was the midday sun, dazzling, scorching, relentless.
They say every castle has its ghosts, its unspoken secrets, forever woven into dusty tapestries. But today we will tell you of a secret so closely guarded, they tried to literally wall it up inside these very stones. This is not just a story of love and power. This is the story of a single room. A room that tolerated no onlookers. A room that became the silent witness to the darkest desires and deepest fears of a king's favorite. What truly lay behind that door? And why was it sealed forever, the moment its mistress drew her last breath? Prepare to discover the story the walls of the Château de Chenonceau have kept for nearly 500 years. He became the King of France at 28, young, strong, and weary of living in the shadow of his father, Francis I. Henry II. His world was one of steel, tournaments, and endless political intrigue. A harsh, masculine, and brutal world. And at its very heart, there was a special place that no other woman of his time could fill. Not his young wife, Catherine de Medici, fertile but unloved. Not the fleeting mistresses, whose beauty faded in a single season. This place was taken once and for all by her, Diane de Poitiers, a widowed countess, a former lady-in-waiting to his father, a woman who was 20 years his senior, a gap that, in that era, amounted to a whole lifetime. What was it about her? Beauty? Certainly. But that wasn't all. Look at her portraits. You do not see the soft features of a young maiden. You see architecture, a high forehead, a straight nose, a firm chin. Her beauty was not blooming, but carved, as if from marble. And it did not fade. While other women her age were already in mourning for their youth, Diane remained the same, cold, beautiful, and utterly untouchable. She became everything to Henry, all at once. The mother he had lost too early, a mentor in the art of power, a political advisor whose opinion he feared, and finally the object of an almost pagan devotion. His letters to her breathe not with a young man's passion, but with reverent awe. I will die if I am not worthy of your love. He worshipped her, and as a testament to this devotion, he gave her not merely a jewel, but a symbol. The Château de Chenonceau, the most elegant, the most feminine château of the Loire, a true pearl upon the water. Chenonceau became her kingdom. Here everything obeyed her will, her ritual, her famous early morning horseback rides, her icy baths in the river, her hours dedicated to managing finances and receiving petitioners. Every day was an impeccable performance, where she played the part of the eternal, beautiful lady. But even the most perfect performance has a dressing room, where no audience is allowed. Among these bright, elegant chambers, bathed in sunlight, there was one door. It was not for show. It was crude, devoid of any grace. And if Diane de Poitiers' life was a public display, this door led to where her shadow lived. It was the only room in the entire chateau where no servant's foot ever stepped. She carried its key on her person at all times, around her neck, right next to her heart. Her private apartments at Chenonceau were more than just rooms. They were a carefully constructed manifesto, a manifesto of elegance, intellect, control, and impeccable taste. Everything here spoke of harmony. Yet, anyone who spent time in these chambers would inevitably sense a dissonance, a false note, and that note was the one door that seemed to lead into another dimension. While all the other doors in the chateau were light, carved, and allowed light to pass through, this one was heavy, cumbersome, as if transported from the damp dungeons of an old fortress. It radiated not the airiness of Chenonceau, but the chill of the Middle Ages. Court chronicles and servants' letters have passed down to us strange, fragmented details. Food for Diane was left on a small table in the adjacent hall. The maids were strictly forbidden not only from entering that room, but even from touching the door with a dusting cloth. The dust on its lintel was as much a mark of its owner as her coat of arms on the chateau's facade. But locks and orders cannot stop one thing: human curiosity. Whispers began to creep through the corridors of Chenonceau. Servants swore that at night, from behind the door, came not quite a sound, but rather its ghost. Not a scream, not laughter, not weeping. An inhumanly monotonous rustling. To some, it sounded like the pages of an ancient folio being turned. To others, like the scuttling of rats under the floorboards. And others still heard a faint grating noise, as if someone were sharpening a blade. But why would the king's favorite, surrounded by servants, need to sharpen anything herself? And there was another sound, a quiet, high-pitched sound, barely born before it died away, a chime. like a finger tracing the rim of a crystal glass, or the lightest tap on a delicate glass vessel. So what was hidden there? A secret lover? But keeping a man in a hidden room, risking her position and her life, that would have been an act of madness, something the calculating Diane would never have dared. Treasure? Her wealth was public. She took pride in it. State secrets? For those, she had ciphers, secretaries, and diplomatic channels. No, the nature of this secret was different. It was not about politics or love. It was about the very essence of Diane de Poitiers, the source of her power, the foundation of her legend of eternal youth. This room was not a vault, but a source, the source of her strength, and, as would soon become clear, the source of her curse. Behind this door, the king's favorite was not hiding a person or an object. Behind this door, she was hiding herself, the part of her that truly made her the great Diane, the part that, by night, entered into a pact with forces even the Inquisition feared. The click of the lock behind her severed her from the world of kings and courtly smiles. Here, in this stone chamber smelling of dust, metal, and dried herbs, her true reign began, a reign over nature itself. This was not a room. It was an alchemist's crucible, where Diane de Poitiers sought to reshape the very fabric of time. Imagine, air thick with the scent of sage, wormwood, and something acidic, the smell of dissolved metal. On the shelves, instead of trinkets, stood rows of terracotta and glass vessels. Some contained pearl and coral, ground into a powder believed to be a source of vital force. Others held something more sinister. Lumps of lead-based ceruse, bright red cinnabar, which is mercury, and the primary ingredient, radiant and deadly, gold. Her famous porcelain complexion was not a gift of nature, but the result of daily applications of lead white, a cosmetic that literally ate away at the skin, causing ulcers and poisoning over time. But Diane went further. Deep in the night, following recipes gleaned from forbidden treatises on alchemy and the medicine of Paracelsus, she prepared her master elixir. She wasn't applying makeup. She was preserving herself, like an embalmer. She wasn't drinking wine. She was drinking potable gold, aurum potable, a solution of gold chloride in aqua regia. Alchemists swore the noble metal would transfer its incorruptibility to the body. In reality, this elixir of life was a cocktail of heavy metals, slowly paralyzing the nervous system and destroying the internal organs. Every sip of that shimmering liquid was an act of desperation and faith. Faith that one could cheat death, paying not with one's soul, but with one's own body. She inhaled the vapors of mercury, which faded age spots but crippled the lungs. She applied arsenic compounds to her skin, which gave a temporary blush but led to an agonizing death. This room was both her private sanctuary and her personal torture chamber. Here, far from admiring eyes, she waged her titanic war, a war that could not be won. Every night spent here brought her closer to the ideal of eternal youth in the eyes of the world, and closer to physical decay in reality. She was sacrificing her health and longevity on the altar of appearance. And the most terrifying secret of this room wasn't even the poisons. It was the fact that it worked. While her contemporaries aged and withered, Diane remained the same beautiful lady. Her energy, her sharp mind, her authority. All of it was paradoxically fueled by her fanatical belief in her own ritual. For a time, the power of her mind seemed to triumph over the weakness of her body. The true cost of this pact with the shadow would come due later, and the reckoning would arrive not from this room, but from a tournament field, which would end her power and open the door for the final, most vengeful act of this drama. And then it came, King Henry's final joust, the last day of the sun for Diane de Poitiers. That day, she sat in the place of honor, surrounded by near-royal honors. Her emblems, her colors, flew above the field. She was at the peak of her power, unaware her world was already crumbling. The blow was swift and absurd. A splintered lance, a cry, a sudden silence, more terrible than the roar of the crowd. For Henry, it was the end of his road. For Diane, it was the end of the life she had known. Henry suffered for 10 agonizing days, and all that time his lawful wife, Catherine de Medici, was by his side. His beautiful lady was not. Diane was ordered to remain in her chambers. For the first time in 20 years, her will meant nothing. The click of the lock on her secret room became a metaphor for her new reality. She was the one in a cage. The new regent's order was brief and non-negotiable. Return the crown jewels and retire to the Château de Chaumont. Diane was exiled from Chenonceau, from the heart of power, from history itself. Catherine de Medici, who had endured humiliation for years, now ruled alone. And her first goal was not merely to exile her rival, but to erase her memory. What did Catherine see when she crossed that threshold? She did not see a lover's nest. She did not see chests of treasure. She saw a laboratory, the remnants of poisonous elixirs, vials containing traces of mercury and lead. Perhaps, lying on a table, parchment covered in notes, recipes for eternal youth. And in that moment, Catherine, a woman both superstitious and practical, understood everything. Her rival was not just a mistress. She was a sorceress in the most modern sense of the word. She had tried to dominate nature itself through alchemy and poison. This secret was more dangerous than any political conspiracy. Could not be made public. Could not be preserved. It had to be destroyed. Catherine's order was brief and terrifying. Wall it up. Never speak of it again. Not to clean it, not to seal it, but to wall it up. The wall, erected in a single night, was more than an architectural change. It was a magical seal, a ritual burial. They weren't entombing a room. They were burying the evidence. Proof that the legend of the eternal Diane was cast in gold and poisoned with mercury. Proof that beauty, bought at such a price, was not a gift from the gods, but a crime against nature.